Tropics are definitely taking headlines here, making headlines here, and I wanted to do my Facebook Live video on what is an obvious discussion point tonight, and that is Hurricane Maria is one of the 10 most intense hurricanes we have ever seen in the Atlantic Basin, in my opinion. Hurricane Maria is now, by many accurate meteorological measures, stronger than Irma was, which was, I think everybody knows, simply put, a brutal force in the Caribbean. I think St. Croix will be absolutely devastated tonight by what is a vicious, vicious hurricane. And I think that Puerto Rico is going to get hit, my opinion, harder by a hurricane than in their recorded history. So we've got an unbelievably intense hurricane that is bearing down on Puerto Rico and St. Croix tonight. So this, I thought, would be a natural Facebook Live video tonight to discuss where we stand, speak a little bit historically around where Maria stands. I know that there's a natural, the nature of humans is to compare, and so what I would also like to do is compare where Maria stands with respect to Irma. You know, I also want to mention here, and I've got this question a number of times over the last couple of days, has a hurricane ever intensified as fast as Maria did? Yeah, the answer is yes. Not my opinion, but it's happened. Opal in 1995, many, many years ago, intensified at a rate faster than Maria did. It intensified and dropped basically 43 millibars in 12 hours, which is astonishing. So, you know, I always like to put everything in perspective so you can kind of understand what we're talking about. So if the question is, has anything ever done what Maria has done? Is this an unprecedented strengthening of a hurricane? It's not. It has happened before. And I say this quite frequently, that stuff like this that's happening now will happen again. Throughout history, we get vicious monster hurricanes, and this is unfortunately going to happen again. This has been a rough, rough year. And I feel like tonight it's going to get worse. Very, very, very concerned about St. Croix, which is a brilliant island in the Caribbean. Very, very concerned. And I'm extremely concerned about what's going to happen in Puerto Rico. So before we jump into the video, I will tell you guys that my goal on a nightly basis is to reach as many people as possible. It's my job. So what you guys can do is help me to reach as many people as possible. What I try to do before we start a video is I try to set what we call a share goal on a nightly basis. The more that we share the video, the more people I reach. So the share goal tonight is to get to 1,000. Remember, you can share it a couple times. It helps me get the video out to more people. Reach as many people as possible. We have hit our share goal for 105 nights in a row. I would not like to come short tonight. So with that, guys, if everybody shares the video in here 3 times each, easily we'll make it to 1,000 shares. So that's my request to you guys. So let's take a look at where we stand on what is a remarkable hurricane season. First, Jose is a hurricane. Actually looks a little better today than it did yesterday. The southern side of the storm's back a little bit. We're seeing some intense convection develop back near the middle. What you'll also notice is this guy is in no hurry to move. It is a very, very slow mover. It will continue to hit the northeast with battering waves and some tidal surge, but clearly the story is further off to the south. So Maria's a beast. Maria now has 175-mile-an-hour sustained winds. Maria's pressure is now down to 905 millibars. The latest pass from the recon, which is the planes flying through Maria, estimated an extrapolated central pressure of around 906 millibars. Now that is not official until the National Hurricane Center makes it official. So what we will see is if the National Hurricane Center actually uses this number. Again, the lowest extrapolated pressure from the recon was 905.7. We'll get a new update at 9 o'clock from the National Hurricane Center, see what they decide. But even if it stays at 909, so I want you guys to understand what I'm talking about. Let me explain. There are several ways to measure the intensity of a hurricane. Pressure, wind. Now I want to explain the reason pressure is more important. A hurricane is an area of low pressure, okay? the lower the pressure, the more intense the hurricane. This is, in my opinion, the only way to measure intensity of hurricanes. So, if you are to gauge Maria versus Irma on pressure alone, Hurricane Maria is stronger than Irma was at its most intense. And I want you to process that for a second. Irma literally wiped out the island of Barbuda. It caused unbelievable damage in St. Bart's, and Irma caused a catastrophe in St. Martin. It basically deforested these areas and in Barbuda made the island uninhabitable. We don't know the extent of the damage yet that occurred in Dominica. But so you understand, Irma is significantly stronger now than when it hit Dominica. So I want to make sure that we're on the same page here. Maria is stronger than when it hit Dominica. So that said, let me go back, show you where we stand. Let me take you in a little bit closer. So St. Croix, southern USVI, Puerto Rico. Now what I'm going to do is draw a line so you can see the basic path of where Maria is going. And I'm actually going to take it back a second so that I can start in the eye and draw the current path. What you will notice is it is jogging a little bit towards the north. So if you're to follow that trajectory, that means this is potentially the worst case scenario for the small island of St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands. At best case scenario, St. Croix takes the right part of the eye wall and never goes into the eye, and that's the worst scenario. The other scenario is that St. Croix goes into the eye of this thing, gets calm for a little while. Either way, I think you can see that it is going to be a vicious storm for St. Croix, and honestly, that is generous. It is going to be a catastrophe. I mean, I don't know if there is another way to state how bad this is going to be in St. Croix. I feel like this will be every bit as bad as it was in Barbuda, St. Bart's, and St. Martin in the island of St. Croix. There are webcams in St. Croix that I am monitoring. So actually this is on my Facebook page if anybody would like to see. This is a live webcam from the St. Croix Caravel Hotel and Casino. And it hasn't deteriorated yet, but I assure you, things will get very bad in St. Croix before they get better. St. Croix thus far has seen wind gusts of the last hour around 48 miles an hour. You can see the winds have gusted as high as 54 miles an hour. And I can also tell you that these winds are nothing like what it will be like when the eye passes over, in my opinion, in about 6 or 7 hours. It will be a storm that will take years for the small island community of St. Croix to recover. So let's then move it a little bit further. Beyond St. Croix, where does this go? If you have friends, if you have family in Puerto Rico, I'm going to tell you that this is going to be a devastating hurricane for Puerto Rico. And you can see while there are wobbles within the eye, you're basically looking at a direct strike on the southeast side of the island nation of Puerto Rico. This will be a devastating strike to Puerto Rico. In my opinion, this will be one of the worst strikes that have ever occurred in the history of Puerto Rico and may be the worst. If you have friends, if you have family, in particular in eastern, southeastern Puerto Rico, tell them they have to take this one seriously. We actually have some viewers within our area that are in Puerto Rico. And like I said, this is a frightening scenario for Puerto Rico. So the latest at 2 a.m., you can see, and I'll zoom you in, takes us basically near St. Croix. And I want to show you something that's interesting here. So here's St. Croix. What you'll notice is as you look at the path of Maria, it's taking more, and this is the current right here, these little dots. It's jogged north of the National Hurricane Center track. So my opinion is they will likely bump the track a little bit further north and take it right into southeast Puerto Rico. Latest data takes it into Puerto Rico as a Cat 5 hurricane with around 165 mile an hour winds. It then emerges. I've been asked, what does this mean for the DR and specifically Punta Cana? So for Punta Cana, you can see that they are going to be off to the east of where the eye goes by. Does that mean that Punta Cana won't see damage? It does not. Punta Cana will see damage, but likely the worst would stay slightly to the north and east. Remember, this is a compact hurricane, so the worst is close to the center, and it will be exponentially worse as you near the center. The Turks and Caicos, if you recall, and Grace Bay is a very famous location in the Turks and Caicos. I can tell you, me personally, I've been wanting to go to the Turks and Caicos my whole life. Grace Bay is likely to remain slightly off to the east, slightly to the west of the center of circulation. That doesn't mean that they are in the in all clear at any. They're going to take a direct strike. If it wobbles east or west, would directly impact how bad in the Turks and Caicos, but it looks like, in particular, the far eastern part of the Turks and Caicos, that would be east of Grace Bay, would likely see 130 mile an hour winds, and then you can see a recurve. So let me show you what people know now as the spaghetti plots. So the spaghetti plots are actually very, very tightly clustered. What you'll notice is the spaghetti plots take this very close to St. Croix. If not striking, in my opinion, it will strike. The data is very tightly clustered, taking this into the far southwestern part of the U.S. Virgin Islands, taking it into a catastrophic strike into Puerto Rico. What this would mean for San Juan is likely not seeing the magnitude of storm surge that the southeastern part sees, but they would still see extraordinarily strong winds that will cause catastrophic damage. Let me go back to that one more time. You can see the data generally tightly clustered and taking this mostly slightly east of the Turks and Caicos Islands, and then where it goes from this location towards the northeast will be part of the discussion in the longer range. I will say that a lot of the data recurves, but if you recall when we were talking about Irma, if you remember in the initial, Irma had this thing moving towards the coast of the Carolinas, and we know that that didn't happen. This thing actually moved through the southern Bahamas, scraped Cuba, and then went into the southern tip of Florida. Now, do I think this is going to end up in Florida? My opinion is it's not likely. That said, the eastern seaboard does need to watch this one very closely. In the 7 to 10 day range, there is still possibilities, but it is, it's still a long ways away from that area. So, I do videos like this because I know we have huge interest around the country and around the world on something like this, and I know that there's going to be a lot of questions tonight on something that is potentially so devastating. I know that we have friends and family that are in Puerto Rico, and I can tell you guys I am thinking, I'm praying for our friends and family in Puerto Rico, in St. Croix, and the USVI. I hope for the best. I hope they are prepared for the worst, because this is going to be vicious. With that said, what I would like to do is open it up to questions, reminding you guys that if you can, please do me a favor. If you can give me 2 shares per person on the video, simply put, what you're going to help me do is reach as many people as possible. The goal is going to be to make 1,000 shares tonight. Please proactively make sure that we get there for the 106th night in a row. And let me open it up to questions. Jennifer's saying, just moved from Louisville to Florida. Still my favorite weatherman. I appreciate that. Thank you. Kevin's saying, I appreciate the live feed as I live on the East Coast. And Kevin, we'll be continuing to do this during the week. I know that there's going to be a lot of nerves. I know after what Irma did, there's a lot of people that are very uncomfortable with a storm of this magnitude moving anywhere in our region, so I get it. So somebody's asking how big the eye is. So the eye is 5 nautical miles across. That is tiny, to say the least. So you're thinking, okay, smaller eye. That's good, right? That's bad. We call this a pinhole eye. When an eye gets this small, it's because the hurricane is upper echelon intense. The way that we rank hurricanes traditionally as meteorologists is pressure. And Maria has now passed Hurricane Ivan and made it into the top 10 most intense low pressures ever in the Atlantic Basin, including the Atlantic Ocean, the Caribbean, and the Gulf of Mexico. And you're probably thinking, well, Irma was the number one. Remember, Irma was number one only if you include pressures over the Atlantic Ocean and not include pressures in the Caribbean or the Gulf of Mexico. Irma did not even make the top 10 in pressure if you include the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico. So in my estimation as a professional meteorologist, my opinion is by the measure that is the most accurate, Maria is more intense than Irma was as a hurricane. So you understand. Tracy asked Katrina. Katrina dropped to 902. That is indeed accurate, yes. The legend of legends from hurricane intensity over open ocean is Wilma. Wilma dropped to 882. Gilbert dropped to 888. And Allen, I believe, was 899. Making it into the 800s is upper echelon of elite. There are very few that ever make it there. There's nothing to say that Maria will make it there, but only 3 have ever made it to that tier in the Atlantic Basin, including the Caribbean, Atlantic Ocean, and the Gulf of Mexico. Ada's saying spoke to her parents down in Puerto Rico and they're getting rain right now. You know, please Ada, emphasize to them to take this one extremely serious. This is life-threatening. This will be the worst hurricane since 1928 in Puerto Rico, and this, in my estimation, will be the worst hurricane ever in Puerto Rico. We're talking upper echelon bad. Somebody's asking, could this impact the Northeast? So what I would ask is, if you recall in Irma, remember the range of solutions was remarkably wide. And if you remember, the early data pointed generally towards the Carolinas, which didn't happen. So if you're asking, could this impact the east coast of the U.S., the answer is yes. Is it the most likely solution right now? It is not. But we need to still be diligent, and we need to still remain aware. This is an upper echelon storm. Even if it makes it to the east coast of the U.S., would it be as strong as it is now? The answer is absolutely not. Absolutely not. Michael's saying they have friends in Puerto Rico that aren't taking this serious at all. How can I help convince them? So what I would tell you, Michael, is let them know that if they remember and look at what Irma did to Barbuda, to St. Bart's, and to St. Martin, explain to them what it did, remind them, and let them know that Maria is more intense than Irma was at strike in these locations. Was the wind sustained stronger in Irma? Yes. But the absolute measure of intensity is pressure. And from that meteorological measure, Maria is stronger than Irma at land strike. So explain to them what they're dealing with. This is upper echelon bad. Deborah's saying prayers for our friends in the Caribbean. And you know what? I say, guys, I'm a man of faith. And I appreciate everybody that's lending their thoughts and prayers to our neighbors to the south. You know, we have dealt with tragedy in our area with EF4 and EF5 tornadoes. We know what it's like. Let's remember our friends to the south. Let me show you guys one thing. I don't know if you've ever seen radar of something so violent, but I actually have radar pulled up so you can see. And you'll notice on the top is Puerto Rico right here. This is the southern part of the U.S. Virgin Islands, and St. Croix is right here. And you can see this is, if you look at the eye wall, I mean, it is as intense as you will ever see. The right edge of the eye wall will be the worst, which will go over St. Croix and then ultimately towards Puerto Rico. That is about as intense as you will ever see. What does it look like, the winds on a hurricane this violent? This is a look at the eye wall. These are winds on one side and the other. These are winds going towards the radar, winds going away, and there are several gates in the radar showing winds over 140 knots, which goes well with what we're seeing from the hurricane recon. upper echelon violent hurricane. It is a potentially catastrophic hurricane that will make landfall tonight in the Caribbean, specifically St. Croix tonight, and then Puerto Rico tonight into tomorrow. Somebody asked if the eclipse has anything to do with this. You know, it's interesting. I've actually received a number of questions, and the answer is absolutely not. There is nothing related whatsoever. We knew, if you go back, we actually blogged about this in April, that it was going to be a very active hurricane season. And if you remember, that was before the eclipse occurred. So you're saying, well, is this related to the eclipse? Well, if it was, how did we forecast it months before the eclipse? Unrelated. Beverly with a share. Thank you. What about South Carolina and North Carolina? My feeling is it's still too far to say. I feel like it's still impossible to take off the table the Carolinas into the Northeast. I would say you can't take off the table specifically North Carolina and then towards the Northeast. I will say that that's not the most likely solution, but it's not impossible. So another question that I've been asked a lot is, do hurricanes and these earthquakes, are they related? No, not at all. It's no relation whatsoever. It has been, from a hurricane and an earthquake perspective, it's been an awful, awful year. It really has. You just, you don't get things this bad that often. And you had two, over the last month that have been catastrophic to the Caribbean, and you've had two earthquakes that have been vicious and catastrophic to Mexico. So there's a lot of recovery that's going to be needed. So this is going to be rough. I feel like St. Croix is going to take the worst of this, and then I feel like Puerto Rico will get hit very, very hard. Somebody's mentioning that, there's no relation between seismic activity and weather, and that's true. What about Florida? Gene, I feel like Florida is probably going, it's almost, it's a high level that you're going to get bypassed on this one. Brian said that his daughter's heading to Punta Cana on Saturday. So Brian, there will likely be some damage in Punta Cana. We almost ran a story about this today, but I want to mention this. So I want you guys to give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. I know a lot of people travel to the Caribbean. Has anybody ever noticed that the trips to the Caribbean are cheaper in the months of August, September, October? Thumbs up if you've noticed that trips to the Caribbean are cheaper in August, September, and October. And I can tell you that a lot of people make their travel plans because those trips are outrageously cheap this time of the year. So if you're wondering, well, why are they so inexpensive to go to this time of the year? It's because of this. And I can tell you as a trained professional, it's the reason why I will not travel to this part of the world in August, September, or October. It's because you can get vicious things like this. So what happens is nobody's going this time of the year, so the trips are cheaper. And that's, you have to understand, if you take the risk of traveling this time of the year to a hurricane-prone area, you're taking a major, major, major risk. In my professional opinion, it's not worth it. So I would say if you're going to do that, November after would be a more favorable time. But even that said, Mexico and parts of Gulf Coast of the U.S., Western Caribbean are still totally in play in early November. When's Maria going to hit St. Croix? So if I give it 6 hours, probably around 2 a.m. Ashley's saying hurricane season drives the cost down, and that is an accurate statement. Guys, we've got 5 minutes left on the Facebook Live video. I want to take a look at where we stand on our shares. I always remind you guys our share goal tonight is to get to 1,000 shares. It is every night. If we make it to 1,000 shares tonight, we'll be over 1,000 for the 106th consecutive night. Why do I ever care about shares? Because my job is to communicate to as many people as possible. and I found it to be a reasonable goal, and we make it almost every night. We're at 6:05. We got 5 minutes left, guys. I need you to step on the gas. If everybody shares it 2 more times, we're easily up over. Matthew's asking, are hurricanes different than tsunamis? Absolutely. Tsunamis are caused traditionally, I say traditionally because you can get other causes, but by underwater earthquakes. So the earth fractures, raises up, that raises the ocean up, which creates the tsunami. Hurricanes are not at all the same. Sharon asks if this will be as bad as Hugo on St. Croix. Sharon, in my opinion, it will be significantly worse. I know that's hard to believe, but I think it will be. Corbin's joining from Litchfield. Corbin, I hope you're having a good night. Justin's saying Cat 5 is the largest, there is no Cat 6, and that's an accurate statement as well. You cannot get stronger than Cat 5. Tiffany with a share again. Thank you, Tiffany. Remember, guys, you can share several times, so sharing multiple times helps the number. Ashley with 3 shares, thank you. Lori's asking if I'm going to give a guess about winter. Not yet. We got our hands full with all this stuff, so I haven't looked a lot. Sue Ellen with 4 shares, thank you. Debris with 5 shares, thank you, Debris. Rob is in the Grand Turk asking, are they going to be safe? So Aruba's no concern. Grand Turk is concerned. You are in still the cone of uncertainty, and it will depend on wobbles of where the hurricane jogs east or west. I think it's going to be dangerously close to the Turks and Caicos. Sharon's saying, yeah, Hugo was devastating for St. Croix. I just feel like, I'll show you again where St. Croix is located and what we're talking about with St. Croix. So this is a look at our hurricane. I will mention one thing. You notice on the northwest side, the tops are not as bright. We may be seeing what's referred to as a eye wall replacement cycle. In my opinion, that's not going to weaken this enough that it would have any impact whatsoever on St. Croix. But you can see, as I draw a line on where the eye is going, you can see it is going smack into St. Croix. They are going to take a vicious, vicious hit from this hurricane. For St. Croix, maybe the worst hurricane ever to hit the island. And like I said, St. Croix is upper. It's such a beautiful place. It hurts me to think what's going to happen there. Jeremy asking if a hurricane is just a tornado over open water. It's not even the same, no relation whatsoever. A hurricane 500-600 miles across, a tornado at the most intense is maybe a mile, 2.5 is the record. So these are scales, order of magnitudes different. It's not the same process, there's nothing even related. So hurricanes are more like regular low pressures you see on the map, except these are incredibly intense ones. Beth is asking, should there be a Cat 6 designation? No. Cat 5 is the worst of the worst. So at that point, since you're going to cause catastrophic damage, it really doesn't make sense to give another level. They're all catastrophic at this level. Stacy's asking about impacts to Florida. It looks negligible at this point. Marty with 56 shares. Marty, thank you, guys. We're sitting at 890 shares. Only a couple minutes left on the video. I need about 200 more shares, and we'll easily get up over 1,000 for the 106th night in a row. Patricia's asking about New Jersey. Patricia, I can't take it off the table at this point. But you're talking about still a long range into the future, and I feel like still a stretch. But the path is very much uncertain at this point, beyond about 5 days. Bobby's asking about what the benefit of sharing more than once is. Bobby, that's a great question. So Facebook has what we refer to as algorithms. So if you notice on my page, there's 207,000 or so people on there. So what happens is not everybody on my page is reached by every video. You're probably saying, Mark, I like your page, I get the video. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately. You would think it does, but it doesn't. So when you guys share several times, basically what it does is it activates the algorithm. Facebook recognizes this is a popular, hot topic, and then they release it to more people. That is simply the way it works. I feel like if somebody likes your page, they should get your content, but it's not my platform. I just simply use it. So that's the answer. Praying for everybody in the path from Jeanette. I think so. That's the thing we all need to be doing. 5 shares from Debris. Beth with more shares, thank you. Let me update you guys. We're closing in on 1,000 shares. I've got about 2 more minutes on the Facebook Live. Let me quickly tell you guys what I'm going to be discussing on WDRB News at 10. Somebody asked, by the way, will this affect Antigua? Antigua is not going to get hit by Maria. It is already past Antigua. So you're probably going to just see large seas, in particular on the western side, but Antigua is okay. So what am I going to be discussing on WDRB News at 10? 10 o'clock, top of the hour. We saw thunderstorms in the area today. Are they done for the night? There's still some in the bluegrass. Who's most likely to see them on WDRB News at 10? Fog is going to be an issue tonight, too. I'll talk about who could see that, how thick. WDRB News at 10:22. Maria is closing in on the island of St. Croix in Puerto Rico. It's going to be a devastating strike. I will update you guys on where we stand on the latest data with respect to Maria on WDRB News at 10:22. And then at 10:37, 90s. We're talking about a real heat wave, a fall heat wave with several. I have actually got, I believe, 4 days above 90, but I feel like it's going to be more than that. When the 90s return, how hot it's going to be for how long on WDRB News at 10:37. So 10:22, 10:37 is when you guys need to tune in on WDRB News. Remember, I always appreciate your support on social media. I need your support on television as well. A quick recap here. St. Croix will be hit within about 6 hours on what will likely be one of the most devastating, if not the most devastating, hurricane landfalls in their history. This will then move on to Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico will be hit by likely what will be still a Category 5 hurricane tomorrow. Somewhere probably around midday to 2 p.m.-ish, Puerto Rico will be hit. They will likely see winds in the neighborhood of 150 to 170 mile an hour as it moves across the area. It will be a devastating strike to Puerto Rico and what could be the worst hurricane strike that Puerto Rico has ever seen. It will at least be probably the most intense since 1928, near 100 years. And it is, quite frankly, what will be a devastating strike for both of these islands. Let me update you lastly on where we stand on our shares. Remember, our goal is to get up over 1,000 shares. If we do, this would be our 106th night in a row above 1,000, and we are at 1175, so we made it, guys. Thank you for the shares. Remember, you can like, love, and share even after the video ends. I'm thinking about St. Croix, the southern U.S. Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico tonight into tomorrow. Keep them in your thoughts and prayers, as this will be a devastating Category 5 strike, at least for St. Croix and likely for Puerto Rico as well. I'm going to rest my voice here, guys, and I will see you on WDRB News at 10 o'clock.